So I first came across your content when I saw this video of this guy saying that he travelled to Afghanistan. I'm thinking, well, that's strange. I'm pretty sure the Foreign Office say that you can't travel to Afghanistan. So I went on the Foreign Office website and then they were like, do not travel to Afghanistan. We repeat. But you obviously did. So how was it?
It was a lot safer than I thought it was going to be. So I'm trying to visit every country in the world, and obviously I'm going to have to go to countries that are considered slightly more dangerous. But I've been to a lot of countries that the UK Home Office have advised against going to, and I've always found that they're actually filled with the nicest people, and I've had the best experience in them. So it's kind of like you have to get your own perception of the world rather than just listen to what other people say, especially when these people actually haven't been to the countries that they're telling us not to go to.
What's the process like? Do they just say, we advise you not to, but they actually can't permit you or stop you from
Yeah,
going?
so basically, when that happens, they can't force people not to go, but because a lot of the time, when the countries that they advise against going to, they don't actually have an embassy or any kind of place in that country that can help their citizens if they go. So I went to Afghanistan knowing full well that if I got into trouble there, I'm on my own. Like, they're not able to help. They don't have a diplomatic relationship with the Taliban at the moment because obviously they're going through a transition of government. So when the Taliban took over in 2021, all the embassies of like the Western countries pulled out, but they're slowly starting to come back. Like, I think there's about 9 or 10 embassies that have now been reinstated in Afghanistan, but they're mainly like Iran, Tajikistan, like the countries around there. But all like the Western countries are yet to do that. But I think over time, more and more will come back. But the whole procedure was that I had to go to an embassy, an Afghanistan embassy, but there's only a select few. So you can either go to one in Dubai, which that would be the route of flying into Kabul. But we were in Pakistan for the month prior, which borders Afghanistan, and the visa situation is a lot cheaper. So we got a visa in Islamabad. We had to go into the Afghan embassy, have our first like interaction with the Taliban, and they basically wanted to know why we were going. We didn't tell them that we were like travel content creators because we didn't kind of know what they would think of that, because obviously they really want good press at the moment. They don't want stuff negative to happen in their country. So by letting like travel bloggers into the country, it's kind of like a gamble on what our experience would be. But we had an amazing experience, and I kind of told the story how it was. Like, obviously, I saw some negative stuff, I saw some positive stuff, I saw stuff that what the media basically said prior to coming, that was completely incorrect. But yeah, it's just kind of like, obviously, I had a good experience there, but if someone else went, that's not guaranteed that they're going to have a good experience. It's just my own personal like view on the country. So I have to be pretty careful with how I word stuff in videos, because I don't want to make a video and then loads of people just decide to go and then something happens. So yeah, it's one of those places.
When you were there, what then were you seeing that shook you in the sense that it was against what the mainstream media was saying?
Well, before coming, I heard that like women aren't allowed to drive, women aren't allowed out on the streets by themselves. They have to be like with a guy. Um, Women aren't allowed an education. Some of it is true, don't get me wrong, but within the first hour of getting into Afghanistan, I saw two separate women driving cars. I saw some like maybe early 20s women walking out of university with books in their hand. And there is a ridiculous amount of women walking around in the streets, but you're not allowed to film women. That's like against the law. So when I was doing my like vlogs for YouTube, I had to be very careful with like the way I was positioning the camera. But yeah, prior to coming, I thought that there was going to be no women on the street whatsoever. But it got to the point where it became irritating filming because I had to always be watching like what I was doing.
What was the typical travel itinerary for Afghanistan? Because, you know, usually with Jet2, if you're off to Magaluf or something, they have like a 14-day itinerary, but I suspect that's not the case.
Yeah, so you have two options when going into Afghanistan. You can either get a guide and a translator, which we did, mainly because we thought it'd be more helpful because we don't speak Dari, which is one of their languages, and the whole you have lots and lots of interactions with the Taliban. It's probably, you can't drive for more than maybe 5 miles without a checkpoint where they stop you and you have to show your passports. Obviously, we had a translator that was explaining what we were doing, given our passports. So our like interaction was just like a hello and a handshake. It wasn't us having to do anything. But basically, we crossed via the Torkham border, which is near Peshawar in Pakistan. So we crossed via that. It was a very bizarre border. Like, I've never seen chaos like that. There was guards on the Pakistan side just whipping people. They had like, like the whips that you would whip a cow, or like the farmer thing. It was that. There was just people getting whipped, and I have no clue why. Like, they were just not like, if they were not in line, they were getting whipped. There was children trying to run from Afghanistan into Pakistan, and it was like, the game that you used to play in school, Bulldog. It was like that, but the kids would try to get past, and if they got caught, they would get like hit by the end of like a weapon and stuff and sent back into Afghan. But yeah, we had no problems at all. But I think that was because it was very obvious that we were foreigners. But yeah, the whole experience was just bizarre. I've crossed hundreds and hundreds of land borders, and I've never seen anything like this. But we finally crossed. We got picked up by our guide, and it was a 6-hour drive to Kabul, which is the capital. But we stopped in Jalalabad, which is another major city. Like, I don't know that much about Afghanistan, but I knew some of these cities purely because when the war with America was going on, like, these are quite common cities that you would hear the fighting was in. So it did feel quite surreal to basically be in these places. But there was no sign that there was like a war that's gone on for 20 years. Like, it's kind of been a lot more like built up and developed now. Like, don't get me wrong, there's still like a lot of like US military tanks that are basically, the US flag has been etched out and they've just put the Taliban flag over, which looks quite funny, to be fair. But yeah, like, you wouldn't honestly know that like a long war had gone on. Like, it has been built up.
Were there any other Western travelers that you came in contact with when you were there?
Yes, actually, we stumbled across a British girl that was solo traveling by. Well, she was with a guide, but I hadn't met her prior. But after like leaving Afghanistan, I've seen she's actually got quite a big social media presence. So that also kind of breaks the misconception that girls can't go there by themselves. Like, obviously, she's an experienced traveler, but like, she went by herself, and I asked her because she'd already been in the country 4 days prior, and her experience had been completely fine when we spoke to her.
What's even like the dress code? Can you wear Western clothes, or do you have to put on something more?
You can, as a guy, you can wear anything. Well, you can't really wear like what I'm wearing now or shorts, but a couple of days we just wore like a black t-shirt, but I can't remember the name of it. But I think it's called like a shaya kameez. It's basically the local robes, but we got one in Pakistan because in Peshawar it's a similar dress, but it looks like you're kind of wearing like an airy like long dress and you have everything covered, but it's actually really comfortable to wear. So we crossed the border wearing that, and then we bought another one in Kabul. But it's more just to respect the local culture. Like, you're in that country, so like, you dress accordingly. Like, it's the same if you go to any other Middle Eastern country. Like, if I'm in Abu Dhabi, I'm not going to wear this, just out of the culture.
So, as you alluded to earlier, this is part of your challenge to visit every country on the planet. What instigated that challenge?
I first started going traveling when I was like 19. I went on like a Southeast Asia trip where it's like the stereotypical route where you do like Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And I kind of fell in love with travel there and then. And I just kind of love to explore like the local cultures. I love to see how like other people live, how other countries do it. And I feel like it makes you a lot like richer and more logical in like a lot of ways in life without actually having a normal education. But yeah, from that, I just went to a lot of countries, and then at one point, I realized I'd gone to like 60 countries, and I was like, "Well, I've done the big chunk, so why do I stop now?" So yeah, I'm on 98 at the moment. I'm gonna very shortly be on 100, which was my first big milestone. I wanted to hit that before I turned age 30, and I'm going to be 30 at the end of August. So I've managed to complete that goal. But yeah, I'm just going to keep going and going and see what happens.
Do you find that you just spend your whole life at immigration control and filling out visas?
Yeah, kind of, but I've slowed down a lot in the last like year because I've kind of found a second home in Bali. Like I really love just going there and basically like resting, re-energizing. It's a very healthy lifestyle. Like there's very good gyms, the food is amazing, and the weather's good. So I feel like when I kind of get any kind of travel burnout now, I'll go to Bali for a couple of months, like re-energize, and then I'm ready to start another trip.
So you said you've got a few more to do in Europe, and Europe's a pretty safe place until about a few years ago, especially on the eastern side. What's on the travel itinerary coming up?
Yeah, so everywhere that would kind of be considered dangerous is where I'm about to head. But I've not had any issues going to dangerous countries so far, and I'm hoping that this isn't going to bite me in the ass. Like you might see me on the news now, like in a couple of months that something's happened. But yeah, I'm heading to Belarus, which is a strong ally of Russia. So that was quite. I had to get a permit to go there, but I'm heading there for a few days, and then going back into Poland, and then I'm going to cross into Ukraine, and then I'm doing Moldova and a breakaway region called Transnistria, which is technically part of Moldova, but it doesn't want to be part of Moldova, and it's controlled by Russian troops. So it's like a country that doesn't exist. So yeah, I'm quite excited for that.
Do you have any requirements of what it actually means to visit a country? Like, does it need to be at least 24 hours, or can like you just hop across the border and back again?
Well, I don't count that. Like, I want to go there. I want to speak to some of the locals. I want to try the cuisine. I want to stay there overnight. Obviously, there's some countries I've been to, like the Vatican and Monaco, where I didn't stay there. I went there for the day, but there it's literally the smallest and the second smallest country in the world. Um, some other places like Liechtenstein, I only stayed for 24 hours just purely because of how small the place is. But usually, when I go to a country, I'll go there and do the sites and explore and stuff.
Everyone knows that traveling is quite expensive, but you seem to do it on quite a shoestring budget. You recently went from Asia to London on pretty much no money. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so that happened about a year ago, but I was just quite slow to post it. But basically, when I started that challenge, I had no confidence whatsoever. Like, I hadn't ever really made travel content. But my friend asked me if I wanted to do it, but I had no confidence whatsoever. Like, even going up to people, had no confidence being on camera. So the whole thing was just very, very scary for me. But I did that, and I improved in every way. Like I can now walk around the street with a camera, like vlogging, and not care about what other people think. My fear of rejection has been completely like eradicated because I had to go and ask people if they could help, and it just kind of highlighted everything that I do with my travels, that there is kindness everywhere, like even in places that would be considered dangerous. But when I did the challenge, everyone was like, "Why are you doing this? Like, you're not going to be able to do it." And we completed it in 15 days. We purely thought it was going to take months. Like I said bye to my family, friends, and my ex-girlfriend, like thinking it was going to be a long time of like not seeing them. But 15 days just shows how eager random people were to help. And yeah, like it was amazing.
What was a typical day then on this journey?
So we'd wake up early, make a sign for the next city that we were trying to head to. We usually had like quite high hopes, and then spent a lot of the time just on roads trying to hitchhike, foraging fruit off bushes and trees because that was our main source of food. I lost a lot of weight during that challenge as well. I lost 6 kilograms in 15 days. So
Wow.
probably good that it didn't last that long. Otherwise, I just would have been like a stick insect by the end of it.
So what countries did you go through in the 15 days?
So we started off on the Asian side of Istanbul in Turkey, mainly because it was like a clickbait for the videos, because technically we were on the continent of Asia. But from Turkey, we went to Bulgaria, Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, Germany, like Belgium, France, and then through into Calais, and then we managed to get a ride with a British family on the boat, which was lucky. That was a whole day in itself. We were like asking everyone that came in for about 9 hours straight, and it was actually someone who didn't look like they would be the stereotypical person to help that helped us as well. So it just kind of shows that even people that technically look like what society would say is more dangerous are the ones that like go out of their way to help.
My favourite short video that you did was when you visited a country. I'd like you to tell us more about it. And everyone refused to take payment for anything.
Oh yeah, so that was Pakistan. That's so I've been to 98 countries and Pakistan's in my top three. And in
Wow.
terms of hospitality, I've never seen anything like that. Like from the day we entered to the day we left, we had messages from people wanting to take us out for dinner if we need somewhere to stay, just to meet up. Like we'd be walking down the street and everyone would just be wanting to say hello to us. We were there for a whole month and I barely spent any money. And I don't like taking stuff from strangers, but they were outright refusing, saying that we're a guest in their country. And like, yeah, it was ridiculous. Like, yeah, I did a video in Karachi where I spent 24 hours, and yeah, it was just kind of to highlight how much people are wanting to go out of their way to help us.
Is that a cultural thing, or is it the novelty of having a Westerner in the country?
I personally think it's to do with the Muslim religion. I think it gets a bad rep, especially in the West. But even going back to the No Money Challenge, the main people that helped us during the challenge were actually of a Muslim religion, and I think it's because in their religion they're brought up to treat like people as a guest and to be very hospitable. But yeah, like I've been to a lot of Muslim countries and I've had the same sort of like people wanting to help, but Pakistan is unmatched for that. Like I've never seen anything like that, and I would recommend that to anyone. But that was another country that, again, like the media kind of suggest not to go to because it's dangerous. Like one area of Pakistan which I went to called Peshawar, that's actually on the UK do not travel list. That probably had the friendliest out of all the people I'd seen in Pakistan. So yeah, it's because it's had issues in the past, but everywhere's had issues. Like I honestly feel I felt safer walking around the streets in Kabul than I do in London at night time, and that says something. I think there's less like petty theft in these countries. Like you're not going to walk down the street and people aren't just going to try to mug you. Like in these countries, if you was to get in trouble, then it would probably be more serious in terms of like there's no one helping you. Like if you got arrested in Afghanistan, the UK or the US embassy aren't going to bail you out. But getting like robbed, that's completely unheard of in these sort of places.
Pakistan, you said was in your top three. Afghanistan then was obviously we've spoken about, and then you went on to Tajikistan. What's the neighbouring countries around this sort of Afghanistan area? Are they completely different?
We crossed from Afghanistan into Tajikistan, and it was ridiculously different. There's people, because obviously you're not allowed to listen to music in Afghanistan. That's illegal, but you'll literally see people on the other side of the river. Like it's very, very close together. Like when we were on the Tajikistan side, there's people like listening to music whilst people from the Afghan side could technically hear it. Like it's like there's people drinking alcohol. It's completely different in that respect. Pakistan is strict Muslim, so it's quite hard to drink alcohol there and stuff. But like, yeah, Afghanistan in terms of the rules, it's the strictest place I've been to. But yeah, Tajikistan, I didn't particularly have a good experience there. Like it was probably my least favorite country, but not down to like anything extremely negative. I just found it to be very boring, but that could have been because I had such an exciting like 6 weeks prior to coming. Like the landscapes of the country itself was beautiful, but because it's completely next to Afghanistan, I felt the same thing with Afghanistan. So yeah, like it was just a lot of driving through like roads that were in bad conditions and then eating soup like 3 times a day as my meal. So yeah, and I wouldn't. It's not a country I'd want to go back to, Tajikistan.
How does the Middle East compare to somewhere like Africa compared to somewhere like the South America?
Well, Afghanistan and the stands aren't actually the Middle East. That it comes under Asia. So the Middle East, if you're referring to that, would be like the UAE, Oman, Saudi. I've been to a lot of them countries, and they're all kind of oil rich. So they've used the money that they've got from oil just to build up and try to make it as touristy as possible. Apart from Oman, they're the only country in the Middle East that have got their oil money and they're preserving like the heritage of the Middle East. So if you go there, there's no skyscrapers. All the buildings are kind of have that like, like mud building look, which was quite nice in a way. Like you go to all like countries like the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, they all look pretty similar apart from Oman, which is like as if what the Middle East would have looked like maybe 20, 30 years ago.
So even from a touristy point of view, visiting the Middle East, Oman is where you get the most authentic experience.
Yeah, if you want to go and see how like you'd imagine Dubai was maybe 20 years ago, then Oman is the place to go. Like I stayed in a hotel in Muscat, the capital, and I found out later that that was the tallest building in the country, and it was only a few stories high. Like whereas literally like an hour away in Dubai, you have the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world. So it's ridiculous how stark the contrast is of the two.
What do you make of Africa? Because obviously the hardest skiers just ran the length of Africa, and then I read about 2 years ago the Walk in the Nile, which Leveson Woods walked the full length of the Nile, and he was just like every country, certainly in the north east of Africa, was just war torn. There was civil war. He was countering continuous challenges. You've obviously done a bit in Africa. What was your experience?
Okay, so with Africa, that's actually my least traveled continent. Prior to, I was recently in Tanzania volunteering at a children's school for a month. But prior to that, I'd only been to Egypt and Morocco, which, in my opinion, that's not like the Africa that you're referring to. Like North Africa is like very like developed. It's kind of it's nowhere near like Central Africa. But yeah, I went to Tanzania quite recently, a couple of months ago, and yeah, I was in for a bit of a cultural shock because I hadn't been to a place like that. Like you can tell the poverty is very evident. There's a lot of like beggars that they just kind of see you as a white person and they think you have money. So like just walking around, you get hassled a lot. But I then went to like a little village in rural Tanzania where I was volunteering, and it was such a good experience. Like there was no one hassling you. Everyone was calling me Mzungu, which I think means white person in Swahili. But everyone was so friendly and nice, and like yeah, I had a really really good time, and I would probably go back and do something similar to that in the future. But I am um, potentially doing a West Africa trip in September, which is probably going to be my toughest travel so far because I have a lot of friends that have done the same sort of region, and West Africa is very tough because there's a lot of corruption. You have to bribe guards just to get into the countries. It can be considered slightly more dangerous. So there's a lot of logistics that are going to be having to be planned for this trip, and I'm going to be doing it with a group of people because I feel like safety in numbers is one of those things for that region. Because going there by yourself, I just think it could be a little bit overwhelming.
That's interesting. So have you found you prefer traveling in a group, or do you prefer solo traveling, or does it really depend on the country?
Well, I only just recently kind of started solo traveling, maybe a year ago, because I was traveling full time with my ex girlfriend, and like prior to that, I was traveling with a best friend. That was like my first trip. So, like, obviously, when I broke up with my ex girlfriend, I just went and started traveling solo, and I kind of learned to love my own company. Like before that, the thought of like going into a restaurant by myself and ordering a table for one, like it kind of scared me. But now I enjoy it more. Like I'm perfectly fine going anywhere by myself, just enjoying myself. And I think that was in correlation to actually going solo traveling, checking out new cities by yourself. Um, Obviously you meet a lot more people when you solo travel as well because you're kind of forced into a situation where you have to socialize if you want to like be with people, whereas when you're traveling with a group you kind of get stuck into that group and it does make it hard to meet new people.
What I was surprised at is when you were traveling in South America and you said Bogota was in Colombia was one of your worst cities yet, which I thought was quite surprising. Obviously, it's very violent history, but I assumed, certainly from the outside, that it all kind of cleared up. But that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own kind of experience when you go to these places. Like I was in Bogota for 5 days and I didn't enjoy it whatsoever. But I also spent 5 days in Medellin, which is another city in Colombia that was where like Pablo Escobar was based. And in the past, that would probably be considered even more dangerous because they had like the Comuna 13, which is like the favelas that were extremely dangerous. But that was one of my favorite cities I've ever been to out of all my travels. And I can't wait to go back there. I would happily go back there as a remote worker and like stay and live there. So I think it is just down to your own kind of experience and what happened. Like when I went there, I stayed at a Radisson Blue hotel, which is like an international chain. And it literally got attacked by people, like by protesters. So like usually if you're staying in a nice place, like stuff like that's not going to happen, but it did. So it is just down to what happens when you're there in the country yourself. And like I might have like pissed off a few people saying that I didn't enjoy Bogota, but if I had a good experience, I would have said I had a good experience. So it's just kind of what happens on the day.
What has been the most surprising place that you've been to?
Probably either Pakistan, as I said, like I didn't think it was going to be anything like that, but Nepal is also in my top three countries. I kind of went there not knowing what to expect. Like I knew it had Mount Everest and it was meant to be like quite beautiful, but I had just gone from Bangladesh to India and then to Nepal, and obviously it's chaos in them two countries. Like it's just so busy and polluted. And then I went to Nepal and it just felt very peaceful and everything there I enjoyed. I had such a good experience there, and I plan to go back there next year at some point. But that was probably my most surprising place, just because I expect it to be a little bit more like India, and it wasn't. It was just peaceful.
So we've got Pakistan, we've got Nepal. What's the third one on the list then?
Well, no, my actual favorite country is Japan. Yeah, it was one of those countries I went to on my first ever trip, and I've not actually been back there since. But I don't know whether if I go back there, it's gonna kind of ruin like my perception of the place, and it won't be my favorite country. Or if I go back there now, when I'm not a broke backpacker, when I have money to spend, and I'm a lot more world travel, I don't know if I'll still enjoy it as much. But everyone I know who's been there recently they said it's up there, but it's just mainly down to the fact it is so technologically advanced compared to anywhere else. Like I was there 7 years ago, and even then I thought it was more advanced than what, let's say, London is like now. Like I was getting served by like robot waiters 7 years ago. So God knows what it's like now in 2024 if I went there, if it was so advanced back then. I also didn't even like Japanese food the last time I went there, and now I do. So I feel like if I went there, I'll enjoy it a lot more.
So obviously it's technologically advanced, but what else about Japan is so amazing? You know, to surpass the experiences that you've had elsewhere.
So I don't know what the word for it is, but I really like neon lights. I think there is actually something that it's called, like when you see like night photography, you see pictures where it's all like lit up, like all like multicolored, like that always is very appealing to me. And seeing that in like Tokyo, walking down the street, and it's just like 24-hour arcades, it's just everything's lit up. Yeah, stuff like that. Just it was very good on the eye. And then I explored like the rest of Japan. I got like the bullet train, which was the fastest train. I climbed Mount Fuji, which was really fun itself. Like around the mountain, there's all these little villages, and you can like rent a bicycle and drive around the lakes and stuff. It's just very beautiful. And then obviously you have the history in Japan, like Hiroshima, which I went to. Kyoto is where you see them old like the pictures of like the old like geishas and the tea houses and stuff. Like it was just stuff that I would see as a child growing up, and then actually going to the country and seeing it in the flesh. Just it felt very surreal, and it was very good.
Japan's a huge positive. What about the negatives? Obviously, Bogota was one. What other countries or places have you been to that you just would not recommend?
There's countries that I wouldn't go back to, but not for any like negative reasons, really. Like I didn't really have a good experience in a country called Brunei, which is it's one of the richest countries in the world, but it's just very small and there's not a lot going on. Like it's strict Muslim to the point where the Sultan actually announced the death penalty for gay people. So it's very strict in that respect. Everything in the country closed at I think 6 p.m. So it was impossible to get food. Yeah, there just wasn't really that much to do or see. So I spent a couple of days there, and I was quite happy to leave. And obviously, it's not somewhere that I personally would go back. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of countries like that for me, especially I'm trying to travel every country in the world. So obviously, there's places like Monaco, which doesn't appeal to me. Like, I'm not really into Formula One or for casinos. So I think that's mainly what that country is. It's like a tax haven for the French. So it's, yeah, like other little small countries like Liechtenstein, like it just reminded me of Switzerland. It was nice, but yeah, there's nothing to write home about.
Do you have any terrible stories of tales from your travels?
Yeah, so actually leaving Afghanistan and entering Tajikistan, I got stuck in no man's land. So basically I got checked out of Afghanistan. I got stamped out, and the way it is where you leave is there's a long bridge, maybe like a mile long, that you have to cross. That takes like at least like 10 minutes to cross. And we got stamped out. The Taliban opened like a locked gate for us and said bye to us, and then we walked across. And then as we were getting to the Tajikistan side, you can see like all like the sandbags, and you can see like a guy with like a rifle like aiming at us, because I don't think many people actually cross this border. And like we were wearing like the local Afghan attire, which they don't wear in Tajikistan. So like we crossed, and as we got closer, it was like a young kid, probably like very early 20s / teenager, and he looked visibly like scared that we were walking across, like he was shaking. And like we reassured him that we weren't there for any kind of bad doings. And then like we got across, and then when we were waiting for the border to open, me and my friend Joe, who Joe's also English, we were traveling with an American and a German as well. um, we gave our passports in, and he kept like trying to scan it, and it just kept coming up like with something on his screen, and like he was like shaking his head. And then we let our American friend and our German friend uh, get their passport, and they got approved straight away. And then we realized that we actually needed to apply for a visa before coming to Tajikistan, and we didn't actually look into it. We thought it was a visa on arrival, but since the UK left with Brexit, they changed the rule for us. So obviously, our friend Ben on a German passport was able to go through, American was able to go through, and we wasn't actually able to buy a visa. So we had to apply for one online, but it takes 3 to 5 days, and it's notoriously slow for the visa approval in Tajikistan. So we were kind of like left in no man's land. We told our friends just to cross, like just leave us, we'll be fine. And we applied for this visa, but it just looked like we wasn't going to get it anytime soon. And the border closed at 6 p.m. that day. So we thought we were going to be sent back to the Taliban. And if we had got sent back into Afghanistan, we had no permit of visa. We don't have a visa anymore. So it was hard to tell what sort of situation we would have got in. Or the only other thing was just to sleep rough in this like little section of no man's land. But we spoke to the British embassy, and like it felt a bit weird having to call up. Like we were like, I rang up the British embassy, and I was like, we're two British nationals stuck in no man's land between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. And there was just like silence on the other end of the phone, and they were like, could you repeat that please? And I had to explain. They were like, why are you there? Like, and we had to explain that we're like travel creators. They asked, is there a hotel we can stay at? And I'm like, no, we're on a bridge in the middle of no man's land. But they basically said, it's not guaranteed, but leave it with us. We'll do our best. And within 2 hours, they had managed to get visas for us. So the British embassy does have a pool in these countries. Like they were able to sort us out this visa just before the border closed. So that could have been a very bad situation if we didn't get approved. But I feel like me and Joe were quite experienced travelers, so we kind of become desensitized to this sort of stuff. Like, we just kind of laughed to ourselves and was like, well, we're probably not going to die, so it's just going to be another story. But as soon as I realized, like, got my camera out, started filming, like, because I feel like people enjoy other people having misfortune nowadays. Like, they're the sort of videos that do well. So you kind of, as a travel content creator, you have to have this in the back of your mind. Whenever something negative happens, you need to be ready to kind of like film the raw interactions of it happening, because like that's what's going to do well. Well, I do have the contact for the British Embassy on WhatsApp now, so I'm sure if I get into any more sticky situations, they can help. Not that they'll be happy to do it, but
That's a good contact to have.
yeah, definitely.
What other stories? Come on, you must have had a few more.
I actually got stuck at the border leaving Tajikistan as well. This was again why I didn't have a good experience in this country. Like, so obviously I got into the country, and then when we were leaving, because I didn't have that much of a good time, we left one day before we were meant to in the evening. So we got a driver to take us up to the border of Kyrgyzstan, which is the next neighboring country, but it's 4,500 meters above sea level, up a mountain. So
Wow.
what we didn't realize was that the border is actually closed for citizens of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. So only tourists can cross the border. So we got a guy to take us to the border. When we got there, it was like an hour drive. They kept saying no, even though we knew it was a 24-hour border, but they wanted money. So we had to bribe them. Once we bribed them, bearing in mind it was like 8 o'clock at night, pitch black, a soldier had to come in the car with us to take us halfway into no man's land. So this no man's land was really, really long. It was about a 20 mile of just barren, like mountain rugged roads, and it was like a snowstorm, so it was thick snow. So we had a contact that was driving from the Kyrgyzstan side to pick us up halfway, and we would swap cars. So when we got all the way up to the no man's land, there was no signal, but because of the snow, the cars from Kyrgyzstan couldn't go up because it was a very tall mountain that they basically actually drive up to. It got to the point where we were waiting there for like 2 hours, and our friends, the German American, were like, "Oh, should we just go back to Tajikistan because I don't think they're coming?" But because we'd been checked out of Tajikistan, again, me and Joe couldn't get a visa because we would have had to have applied, and it would have been 3 to 5 days. So we got stuck in no man's land once again, and there was like no way for us to get back in. There was no way for us to go into Kyrgyzstan because walking down the mountain was an option, but it was 10 miles. It was thick snow, extremely cold, and the snow leopards in this area because no one lives there. So yeah, we basically had to sleep in a car. There was 6 of us in a car, like in quite a small car. And then eventually, like a couple of hours later, the car that was meant to pick us up had finally managed to get up the mountain, and we were saved basically. And then yeah, that was just a very long old day. And then it was a 7 hour drive to the nearest town in Kyrgyzstan. But I was quite happy just to finish that chapter. And shortly after, I flew back to England just to chill. So very intense traveling and stressful traveling.
You must have had some serious nights, rough sleeping, just wherever you could find it.
Yeah, like doing the no money challenge, we slept under a bridge in Belgrade. We also had to sleep in an abandoned construction site in Bulgaria as well. And obviously, prior to that challenge, that was the first time I'd ever slept rough in my life. Like, I had quite a lucky childhood to the point where I didn't ever have to experience anything like that. But it did make me more like empathetic to homeless people. Like, since the challenge, if I see homeless people and I have like food, or I'll give them food. Prior to that, I used to just kind of just keep to myself. So yeah, stuff like that has kind of made me a little bit better in that respect.
Money's an interesting point because all of these flights, all of these sometimes bribes, well, it all costs money. Where are you getting that from? Are you working in between trips?
Yeah, so prior to getting big with content creation, well, let me take you back to the very start. Like, when I was younger, I used to be a bartender, and I used to just save up as much money as I could. Then I would quit my job and I would start traveling. And then when the money would run out, I would then go to. I went to Australia. I had like a working holiday visa. I did the same thing. I kind of like worked and saved up money. Did the same thing in New Zealand. But then I started to learn like how to like invest in crypto and stocks. So I did a bit of that, and then since starting like travel content properly, I've been able to like monetize my travels, whether that be free accommodation, brand deals, UGC, which is user generated content. So it's got to the point now where I can kind of travel and not have to worry about money because I'm able to work from my phone or my laptop, which is another reason why I spend a lot of time in Bali, because the lifestyle there is a lot cheaper and it's much better than staying in England, America, or Australia. Like the prices are like a third of what it would be to do the exact same thing here. So if I'm able to get my income from my phone or my laptop, then it makes a lot more sense to be in a country that's cheaper, because then you can live like a king.
So if we were to put you on a psychologist couch and ask you why you refuse to do the normal path, get a job and settle down, why are you constantly going from country to country? What do you think the psychologist would say?
See, I don't know. Like I went through. I have worked a 9 to 5 in my life, and I just hate it. Like I hate the thought of just getting up, getting like the tube, like to a menial job there, and just working until you retire. Like there's more to life than that. Like I've I've seen more in my life than most people would have in their whole life, and I'm 29 years old. Like I feel like if you're motivated enough, you'll be able to find a way to get out of the rat race, as people call it. Like if you just need to like look for ways to make money online. There's so many opportunities in 2024 to make money, and I feel like if you want it enough, it is possible. But yeah, in terms of like a psychologist way, like I don't know. I think most people don't want the 9 to 5 life. They don't want to work for 50, 60 years to have a couple of good years to retire. Like surely people want to have that lifestyle now while they still have energy and time. Like I feel like when I'm like 70, I'm not going to have the energy to do what I'm doing now. So this is why I think it's important that I do everything I want to do now. Like it's weird though, because I do have friends that have followed the 9 to 5 route. They've been at the same job for like a decade. Some of them are getting married. Some have kids. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be 30 soon, and I'm just not ready to settle down for that lifestyle yet. So I don't know if I ever will be. That's the issue. But I'm enjoying my life, and that's probably all that's important right now.
So that's a pretty good answer. So looking ahead, what do you have coming up? Obviously, you're off to Eastern Europe. Then what after that?
So then I've got that. I've either got two options. I've got the Africa trip, or I'll head back to Bali for a few more months. I'm wanting to invest in real estate in Bali because I feel like that is somewhere that I would like to stay long term, and there's a good like return on investment in property in Bali at the moment, because the whole country, the whole island's like a building site. Like everyone's building nice villas. I've got a friend who has just bought a lease somewhere, and he's going to be renting it out on Airbnb. So I'm going to kind of use him as a guinea pig for the next few months and see how his one works out. And if it does well, then I might think about doing the same thing. But obviously, the logical point from my travel kind of career would be to do the Africa trip, which is what I'm slightly swaying more towards, because Bali's not going anywhere. Like once I finish the Africa trip, I'll probably need to chill somewhere for a bit, because I think that is going to be one of the more stressful trips I've done in my life. So yeah, it'll probably be Africa. I'm thinking about doing. There's an iron ore train in Mauritania, which is the longest train in the world, and you basically sneak onto the carriage and you sleep there the night, and it goes through the Sahara Desert. So I'm thinking about doing that as my next like big thing in Africa, and then work my way down the western coast.
That sounds awesome. So when you're in Bali, are you just renting like somewhere off Airbnb? Yeah, because you're there for extended stays.
Yeah, so I used to, but because I've been there so long now, I have a lot of friends that are living there long term, and they got me in touch with like a guest house owner, which is I'm only paying £300 for a month, and it's such a
Wow.
nice place in a good location, has a kitchen, weekly cleaner and stuff. So I used to like splash out on like the bougie like villas for the month, but this is just ridiculously cheap to the point where like I've just come back from there like last week, and I stayed in this guest house and I loved it. So yeah, when I go back there, I'll probably just stay in the same place for now.
So looking forward, what country have you not done which you think will be the hardest to do or at least get in?
So Turkmenistan, and North Korea. These are two countries that are like controlled by a dictator, and Turkmenistan really don't like tourists. So you have to hide the fact you make travel content. It's just a very closed nation, and it's hard to get into. And if you do, you have to be with a guide. But it's quite famous for a thing called the Gates of Hell, which is like a big crater that's been burning for like I think over like 60 years straight with that, and no one really knows why. So that's a country I want to do relatively soon. And then when the North Korea border opens, so it's just open for Russia and Chinese citizens, but when it opens for everyone else, I'm going to do the marathon there. So
Oh, yeah.
in April, you do the Pyongyang Marathon. It starts and finishes in the National Stadium, which is filled with 60,000 North Koreans. They've got a synchronized like clap. So they've got orchestrators that basically tell the crowd when to clap. But it will just feel like quite a weird um, situation, like starting in a massive stadium, like that's absolutely sold out, doing the marathon, which you can then interact with people along the route, you be able to talk to them. Because all the other times you go to North Korea on a tour, it's very much controlled. You take photos where they tell you to take photos, you talk to these people. But obviously, for a marathon, you're going to be running for 26 miles, and there's going to be people along the route that you're able to like talk to. Like I've seen people in the past that have done the marathon and they've been able to interact with like people that you wouldn't usually be able to interact with if you was just doing a normal guided tour. So yeah, that's going to be another thing I plan to do, because technically I have crossed the border into North Korea from the DMZ zone, which is in South Korea, but I don't count that as visiting a country because, as you said before, like I feel like I need to see the country properly and not just step across. But I know a lot of other travel content creators actually count stepping across as visiting the country, and Guinness World Records also counts it as visiting North Korea, which I don't agree on. But yeah, when the border finally opens, I'll probably be one of the first people that heads there.
Well, I wish you well on all of your travels. Kieran, thank you very much for coming on to the show. I've really enjoyed just listening to all of your stories.
Thank you for having me.